Our first question from the audience, Kate, this did drop in during your segment, and you mentioned, albeit briefly, getting a communications plan in place, potentially getting a communications firm involved. Do you have any best practices that you could share when it comes to getting a communications firm involved to prevent a cyber incident becoming a PR nightmare? Is it a case of instigating and getting them involved in tabletop exercises, as Carolyn may have mentioned as well?
Yeah, I think a cyber crisis communications firm can be really, really helpful. I mean, one is, first is you want to make sure that the communications team that's in-house, if you have one, is on board and, with the hire. Two, hire them through legal so that it's privileged. Three, I think the more they understand the incident, and there's some firms that we work with who, their knowledge of, the current cyber threat landscape, as well as the market that the client operates in, is very helpful just in terms of understanding what industry expectations are, as well as, because different clients communicate differently. And I think there's having a team that can help you through, when is the appropriate time to make a communication and what will it say and to what audience is just can be very, very helpful. And so generally, I think that, if you look at the incidents that have had a more difficult time in terms of publicity, they are sometimes the ones where the company has to make multiple kind of almost like corrective disclosures where they announce an incident and then they update it and then they update it. And when you're updating information, although we all know that your information changes in the course of an investigation, I think the public isn't always as forgiving. And so you want to think very carefully about when you make an announcement and what you say and what you commit to then announcing on a going forward basis if what you are sharing is preliminary information. So I think, a communications firm can be very helpful in terms of sequencing and also in terms of segmenting what those different audiences are and what's the point of the communication, because there will be a knee-jerk reaction sometimes to just, well, we need to tell someone because we know this is a big deal. And that I think is in some ways a really good instinct, because you want to keep people informed, but you want to give them good information that they can use. And I think that having a PR firm in that regard that specializes in crisis communications can help focus that conversation and make sure that both the communications team as well as the business side and the other customer relations side, that everybody has that voice and that input. From a project management side, I think we also want counsel involved. We try to limit drafts and have conversations where possible, because you don't want to have a lot of drafts going back and forth. You really want to limit, what you write down in that regard. And then I think it's so much of that really comes down to timing and aligning it with the investigation, which I think is also where legal provides value there as well. And then I think, the way you can schedule your cadence calls in terms of the project overall is to have the communications firm join for part of it. And you can control what they hear. They can hear what's relevant to the message on that call and then drop, or you can have them stay for longer. And I think that just depends on the type of incident and everyone's kind of relative level of comfort and the potential exposure. And then I think the other thing that they would work through, and this is probably should have talked about this earlier, but is how you escalate communications up through leadership, and they can be helpful with that as well. But I think you want to always put that checkpoint in before you are contemplating public communications, is to make sure that that there's no backfield in notion, that everyone is speaking with one voice at the enterprise.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. We do have a two-part question here for yourself, but it's open to all of our other panelists as well. But Carolyn, what are some of the trends that you're seeing, and are there any sort of quick wins a company could do to protect itself?
Sure. And this is going to seem like a very simple thing from an initial standpoint, and I bet everybody will have their ability to kind of comment on this. But in terms of, just to answer the second question first, what are the quick things that you could do? One of the things I always recommend to everybody, is very good about, sometimes having these incident response plans and, having the people to call, but it's not worth anything unless it's actually printed out. I know me without my cell phone, without phone numbers, without internet, just think about it from this perspective. If you don't have access to your email and don't have access to your systems and things like that, if you have this wonderful incident response plan that we all talked about here today, and it's not printed out on a piece of paper and you don't have access to it, it might not worth be anything in the salt. In terms of trend, I think I talked about one earlier is, and there's definitely an uptick in terms of attacks to managed service providers and vendors, and everybody taking a look at a little bit more of their managed service provider contracts and things like that. But the other one alludes to what we were talking about earlier as well, which is this ransomware. I think it's becoming more and more prevalent. I think it's also becoming a situation where you've seen more and more variants that have data exfiltration capabilities where the unauthorized actor has had access to personally identifiable information or personal health information. So I think that's something that people need to be wary of and need to be prepared for to the extent that you ever could be.
Thank you so much. I think we've got time for one more question. Jim, this did drop in while you were speaking here, so this is directed to yourself, but again, it's open to our other panelists as well. But Jim, how can one help ensure the company that I work for has the appropriate cyber insurance coverage? Is there anything I should be keeping an eye out for when it comes to my cyber insurance policy?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that a little bit. Is just understanding your organization and what it is, what risk you're trying to avoid. It goes back to my example of the cardboard box manufacturer who had PCI coverage, but they didn't collect credit card information. So I think it's just important to loop in your chief risk officer, your CISO, your broker, and then make sure you're getting the coverage that you need and you're avoiding that risk that you're trying to push off on insurance.